Yeah, and the interesting thing about VJ's chart is the way he grades each form of money, that can change over time.
Yes.
But one thing I wonder if is missing, and perhaps is missing to the benefit of Bitcoin, is volatility. And I think price volatility is something which is helpful to understand in consideration for this, because if you look at the chart or you look at VJ's chart, to me it implies, oh, well, that's the best form of money. It can do every single thing I want. Therefore, I should hold all my money in Bitcoin. But there's a risk to that because of volatility. And I always felt like if you wanted to make a decision about which forms, maybe multiple forms of money, there's argument to hold a basket of Bitcoin, gold, and maybe dollars. And I know that's heresy with some Bitcoiners, but I think that you can make a solid argument if you wanted to plan long term. You could have a mix, but to consider that mix, I think volatility should be considered. Do you think that's fair or not?
I think it's a huge variable, especially for medium exchange and unit of account, right? So basically, I would describe Bitcoin as an emerging money. It's a 13-year-old money, right? So it doesn't have the track record or the size of those other monies. And because it's a smaller market, it has more volatility. It's got basically a bigger range of outcomes for how it could look in 10 years compared to, say, gold, right? So because there's a bigger gap of expectations about what this could become, the volatility is very large. In addition, because it's a smaller market, less liquidity, even though it's got quite a bit of liquidity, it's got less liquidity than say the dollar market or the gold market. And that's because it's smaller. And so, if a Michael Saylor comes in, they can potentially move the market. Whereas if you have a handful of hedge funds, fast money deciding to sell it because of whatever macro factor they're looking at, that can also move the market. And also because it's known for good returns, there's even though leverage in the space is actually small relative to market cap or other ways of looking at it, there's individual parts of the market that are extremely leveraged, and those easily get liquidated when you have big moves to the upside or downside, which exacerbates volatility. And so it's kind of people are betting on it in a way they don't bet on, say, gold and things like that, or at least not at this scale. And so that adds to volatility. And one way to think about fiat currencies is they try to optimize for low volatility, but then the sacrifice they make is devaluation, right? So they kind of have this manual adjustment mechanism where if you get deflation, they want to print a lot more. If they start getting inflation, they try their best to throttle that back. And they've had mixed success with that. But basically, you never really have a case where developed market currency is 50% less useful the next year, right? Whereas that can happen with Bitcoin, even more so. Now, in extreme historical events, even those fiat currencies, they break down. So they go decades and decades and decades without having a major volatility event. And then you get like a 1933 event where it's just, it's practically cut in half. Or you have like emerging markets go through this far more often. The Egyptian pound had a month where it just cut in half about 5 years ago. And so that kind of thing is common throughout the world, unfortunately. But in developed markets, from year to year, the volatility is low. And that combined with the fact that it's recognized as legal tender makes it a useful form of kind of like near-term money that you can save it. It's going to be worth roughly the same in 6 weeks. And, you kind of go about your day. And that matters for people where their incomes and their expenses are very close, right? So if you're living in a country and you're making $400 a month and your expenses are $400 a month, you can't like risk holding a lot of your assets or whatever assets you might have in something that can go up 50% or go down 50% during that time. You pretty much have to have a stable amount because you have no margin for error. Whereas, of course, if you have a large pool of capital, you have a better ability to withstand volatility. So it's kind of a privilege to be able to accept volatility for harder, better money in the long term.
Well, Alex Gladstein talks a lot about this in certain markets, that Tether is much more important than Bitcoin. Places, Turkey, what the inflation rate, did I see it's over 100% now? I can't.
It was very, very high.
Yeah.
I think it was high double digits. It was insane.
And he talks about, say, people who in Palestine who struggle financially. And he said for a lot of people in these places, they cannot risk having a high volatile asset such as Bitcoin because they have day-to-day costs. And maybe they can have a small amount in there and hopefully that'll appreciate in value. But some people are living hand to mouth. So something like Tether has become super important in these markets. And when he explains to me the importance of that, I've had to check myself on, criticisms of altcoins, and I think there are fair criticisms of them. But at the same time, if these are currently solving a problem for people, I find it hard to take a firm position against them.
Yeah, I've not been bearish on stable coins overall. I think that it's obviously an innovation. Like if anyone who tries sending money internationally, stable coins are an improvement.
Yeah.
It's just better technology. Obviously, I'd like to see them on Bitcoin, right? And so we've actually seen some announcements at the conference about being able to bring stable coins back to Bitcoin Lightning. So all else being equal, I'd like to see them there. But yeah, one of the few cases in altcoin land that actually has use case, I think, has been the stablecoin market. And Tether's an example, whether it runs on Ethereum or others. It can run on any, if a chain gets too expensive, it starts spilling onto another chain. And that is useful for people. And even like an example was Lebanon, where they're going through a major currency event. Even ones that were holding dollars in bank, that then is prone to confiscation, transferring back to the local currency. And so ironically, Tether ends up being safer for them than holding their dollars in a local bank. Whatever questions people might have about Tether's collateral or things like that, their ability to blacklist addresses, they look at that compared to what's happening in their local banking system. They're like, well, I'll take the Tethers. And so it is important for people, especially when there's not a big margin between your expenses and your income, to have a low volatility asset. And so that can mean different things to different people. I mean, currency is generally very low volatility over, say, a 2-month period, except for extreme events. Then you have gold that's more volatile than that. And then Bitcoin's obviously far more volatile than that. And that's actually one of the downsides longer term, is that there's then an inverse correlation between volatility and their ability to hold value long term. And so the cost of that volatility management is ongoing devaluation.